Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, around the world, as we welcome you back to another virtual meeting with the Portsmouth Site Department of Energy, FBP, the contractor that does the work on the site, and all the folks involved in making this meeting happen. We want to welcome you to the second night of our second in a series of public interactions and meetings concerning the cleanup and the environmental monitoring taking place at the gaseous diffusion site, the former gaseous diffusion site that in Piketon, Ohio, in southern Ohio, and everything that goes on with it. So you survived Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Giving Tuesday, and we're back around to public meeting Thursday. So what a week it's been, and we can't think of a better way to finish a crazy 7 days than to spend it with you here tonight. And we're glad to have you. So we got together as a group about 5 weeks ago for our first of this series in the public meetings, and we covered a lot of ground. We talked about kind of a brief overview of the cleanup project going on the site and the work that's being done, and how the buildings were being demolished and waste was safely being placed in the on-site disposal facility, and how we used air monitoring to help ensure the health and safety of workers, of the environment, of folks that live near and around the site. And so tonight we're going to continue that discussion and dig just a little deeper into those topics, right? We're going to just peel the onion back a little more. We're going to talk about co-located monitoring and what that means and why that's a benefit to you and to the community, why it's a benefit to DOE and their contractors and the workers on site. We're going to hear another update on what's going on in the last couple weeks and what's new and exciting at the site. And then we have Kathy Higley's going to jump in and kind of tie it all together for us at the end. But as this meeting takes place, with all meetings, it doesn't work unless there's interaction between all parties involved. So we really want you to reach out and be able to jump in and participate with us. And there's a couple different ways. Donnie, if you can throw up the slide, a couple different ways where you can interact with us tonight. First and foremost, got the next slide for me, Donnie? Yeah, so first and foremost, you can always throw a question up in the chat box. Now you can watch on YouTube or on the WebEx. There's two different options for you here. So if you throw a question up on chat or on YouTube, we're monitoring those and we'll be able to catch those in real time. And we're going to try to respond to those in a Q&A session later on tonight, if at all possible. That's our target. If it's a question that can be answered quickly and easily, and if it's a more complex question or a little nuanced, we'll provide you with a response in writing. And we've done that since the first set of meetings, and continued through the last 5 weeks to continue to throw up Q&As on the website. And so that's a great way to follow and check in on us. You can also email us questions. If you have questions, you can send those to ports-demo-questions@pppo.gov. ports-demo-questions@pppo.gov. And so you can send those during the meeting, after the meeting, 3 weeks from now, when the question pops up about any of the material we've discussed. Shoot us an email, and we'll try to get you a written answer if there's not already one that's similar to the question you asked up on the website. Hey, you want to know where the website is? Check us out at portsvirtualevent.com. There's a button at the bottom of the screen that will link you to questions and answers. I think it's frequently answered questions. And you can follow that, and it'll take you straight to all the questions that were asked last month and before Tuesday night. And you can they're grouped according to topics, real easy to follow, and you can see the answers to all the questions that are already out there. So we just want to make sure that we were listening and that we were answering and following up with you on that. All right, so let's check our chat to make sure it's working and everybody knows how to do it. So we've done this a couple times and it's been really great. If you don't mind, if you can go to the chat feature, whether you're on YouTube or WebEx, and share your name and where you're from. It's a great way for us to see how widespread this is. It helps us to convince folks that this virtual meeting style is beneficial and reaches folks that might not be able to attend a meeting in person, and lets us know who all's out there and who we're talking to. So it's a great way to kind of make us feel a little closer together, since this crazy COVID thing's got us at separate places all over the world, on WebEx and YouTube, instead of in the same room talking face to face. So, all right. So here's our agenda for tonight. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. Jeff Bettinger, the DOE site lead, is going to lead us through a port site update, right? What's new and what's shaking at the port site and some of the exciting work that's going on there. Frank Johnston, right? He's Director of Environmental Protection with FBP. That's the cleanup contractor. That's the organization, the company that DOE has hired to do the cleanup work at the site. He's the Director of Environmental Protection, and he's going to talk to us about co-located air monitoring data and what that means. And why that's beneficial, and then how we kind of use that data and what goes on. We're going to follow that with air monitoring and managing risk, right? So she's practically a Southern Ohio citizen, right? I think she's got voting rights, but Kathy Higley's been with us and been around the community for a while. She's going to talk to us about what that means, right? When we look at the data, what does it mean in managing risk, and how do we apply it to ensure that the workers are safe, that our friends and family that go out to the site and are knee deep into work, or that we know they're taken care of? How do we know that the environment and those that live further out in the community are safe as well? And we're going to talk through that. Take a short break at that point. Let our presenters grab a sip of water, stretch their legs, give us a chance to compile your questions. We're going to come back and we're going to address your question and answers. And I see we've already got some questions coming in via email or the chats. So those are already populating. So we got that. And then after we've done our Q&A, we'll open up mics for public comment. So that's the plan for tonight. And again, as we do all our meetings, and you guys have been so great about this, but I want to remind you, these meetings are being broadcast on YouTube, which means little eyes and ears can stumble across these. So we want to make sure we're on best behavior, and we choose proper language, and we treat each other in an appropriate and responsible manner. And we model good dialogue and discussion for any folks that stumble across this. All right, with that being said, make sure we've covered all the bases. We're going to start our presentation. So we're going to hand this over to Jeff Bettinger. He's the DOE site lead, and has you guys have known Jeff. He's been around for a little bit and talked to us on multiple occasions. So Jeff, when you're ready, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah. Hey, your camera appears off, Jeff. Can you?
I can see me.
There you are. Perfect. There you are.
Oh, okay. All right.
Got it.
Okay, good. All right. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for participating in this virtual meeting. It's the best thing that we can do to have public meetings, given the current circumstances. As Eric mentioned, I'm Jeff Bettinger. I'm the Portsmouth site lead responsible for the work that's being done here. And this gives you a little bit about my background. I've been involved in the deactivation and demolition of a lot of different facilities, and been involved in design and startup for over 45 years, and everything from chemical weapons to medical waste to nuclear facilities. And all of those things give me the tools to be able to ensure that this is being done and done in the safest manner possible. We have the next slide, please. This is an overview of the site. We were just talking today that we're going to update these pictures because Donnie's been taking some great ones that you've seen in the preview here, because right now we've got nearly 4 sections of the 326 building down, and that would be a nice update to it. But this is an overview of the port site, and we're looking north to south, and anyway. But the area that's inside the perimeter road, the industrial area, is about 1,200 acres. There's over 400 buildings in there. Portsmouth is basically a small city. We have fire department, police department, railroad, water treatment facility, sewage treatment facility, expansive power distribution system, miles and miles of roads and piping and telephone systems and things like that. They started building this facility in the early 50s to enrich uranium. Unique thing about Portsmouth is that it took natural uranium and enriched it up to 98+% enrichment. A lot of that was material that was used for, it was both weapons material and then also used for nuclear reactors, which goes back in my heritage as a former Navy nuke. DOE came in about 1989 to start the cleanup, using the existing operators to operate the equipment to purge it and clean the residual material out of there, and started in earnest in 2010 with hiring a demolition and deactivation and demolition contractor to start in earnest with preparing these buildings for demolition so that we could turn this site over to the community. Can I have the next slide, please? This gives you a view of some of the key things in here, and what I want to focus on are the 3 process buildings. And they're shown here, the X326, the X330, and the 333. Those are the largest buildings on site. Each of those are about 30 acres, some of the largest buildings in the entire DOE complex and largest industrial buildings around. The raw material came in the 333 and then was processed and got higher and higher enriched until it finished up at the 326. And we're starting our demolition with these larger buildings. That clears up area in the site, and it gives us a chance to put most of the material into the on-site waste disposal facility that you see there, the OSWDF. You can see all of the boxes on there. Those are individual cells that we build, so that we build this facility as we're doing the demolition, so that these things are working simultaneously as we're progressing here. And our goal is we go into a facility and we deactivate it, which is take most of the hazardous material out. We do extensive surveys to determine just what kind of radiological and hazardous constituents are in there, remove the material that we have to, that we can't dispose of in the on-site waste disposal facility and have to ship off site. We certainly do that. And our goal is to complete demolition of the 326, and we're currently working on deactivating the 333 so that that highly skilled crew can just move right to that next facility. Could I have the next slide, please? Here's a shot of the 326 process building being demolished. Couple things I want to point out on this picture. Those of you who've been at all 4 of the presentations, this will be familiar to you, but we use conventional, what we call yellow iron excavators, high reach excavators to do this work. We put special fittings on the front end of them that are shears that basically take the structural members, the large I-beams in the building, and can just cut them in half like a pair of scissors. And we do that to bring the material, the buildings down. These facilities are mostly structural steel, concrete. There's a lot of electrical switchgear in them. So there's just that sheet metal that's involved in those. And so we're taking all of that and we're taking the big pieces and making them into small pieces. Same thing with the piping that's in there. We're able to do that. I want to point out as you look up along the right-hand side of the building, you can see something that looks like a sprayer. That's actually spraying. It's a fogger. It's very similar to like a snowmaking machine that you'd have at a ski resort, but it puts an aerosol mist of water on the site. That's to control particulate, keep the dust down. Sometimes you'll see other demolitions and they'll just use fire hoses. Lessons learned from other facilities are that these are much more effective. We can also add material to this to make it work better. We call that fixative. And so the biggest thing that we strive to do when we're doing this demolition, of course, is to do it safely from a physical point of view, but to keep the dust down because that controls any contamination from leaving. And the other things we do to do that are we've sprayed fixative in the building in a lot of areas. And then we've sprayed fixative on the trans site, which is the asbestos sheeting that's on the outside. That's why it was blue. And then when we take that trans site down, we spray fixative from the outside inside the building to get additional surfaces. In addition, the debris piles we spray with fixative to keep the dust down on them. And we have a large number of these misters that we're using as we're doing this on the site. Couple of key things I want to point out here for milestones are that we've completed the removal of the trans site around the outside of the building. That was successfully done without incident, no injuries. That was completed last week, November, or just before Thanksgiving on November 23rd. That contractor's there now demobilizing. That material is wrapped up and is going to be placed in the on-site waste disposal facility. And our goal for this calendar year is to complete 4 of the 10 sections. In this photograph, they are munching on section 4. We're going to complete that in 2021, and then the way we're progressing, we're going to have the whole building down in 2022, and then it will go up to the on-site waste disposal facility. It's going up as we're taking it down. Another thing I want to point out is that this is an application of another lessons learned, is that surrounding the building, we've actually installed what we call a berm, and it's filled with gravel. And it's an area that's lined. We put a liner in there and leak checked it so that all the water from rainwater and this dust suppression water will be collected. And then it's pumped over to a water treatment system where it's treated for organic material, radionuclides, particulate, and oils, things like that, before it's discharged to one of our permitted outfalls. So that's an application of a lesson learned from other demolition activities. Could I have the next slide, please? When we take this material up to the on-site waste disposal facility, it's a bunch of irregularly shaped material. Beams, things like that. There are size criteria for them, but when you put them in to the on-site waste disposal facility, there's a lot of void space. And that's not a good thing, because when you have the void space, it means that things will settle in the long term. And so what we do is we put soil in there, engineered fill. It can't just be any kind of a soil. We like soil that's got a lot of clay in it, that meets the approved engineering criteria for that. We've worked with Ohio EPA to validate that the soil that we have on site meets this criteria. And the thing I want to point out here is that if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see the area inside Perimeter Road, which is designated orange, and you see some purple areas and some yellow areas. The purple areas are plumes of groundwater contamination, and we are actually excavating those contaminated plumes, and that soil is ideal for us to use as engineered fill in the on-site waste disposal facility. And you see on the left here, this is the actual excavation going on, where we're collecting that material and we truck it up to the on-site waste disposal facility and we put that in. It's about 2.5 cubic yards of soil for every cubic yard of debris to give us that good, structurally sound, structurally stable material in there, material mixture inside the on-site waste disposal facility. And within the perimeter road, there's also several landfills or burial areas that we will be excavating also. And so that's actually a very good thing, because what that means is that the area inside perimeter road, when we excavate these plumes, that area will be suitable for industrial redevelopment. So that's a really good thing for the local community. So often when a cleanup is done, there's a fence put around it and there's access is restricted because of lingering contamination, but we're taking care of that so that they'll be able to put some sort of an industrial facility in here that the local redevelopment organization works with to come back here, and that can bring jobs back. Have the next slide, please. I mentioned that this material goes to the on-site waste disposal facility. Here's a great drone shot. Donnie's been doing a great job with keeping us up to date on these. I like this picture because it shows 3 of the cells in the on-site waste disposal facility in different levels of activity. You see cell 1 there, the construction's complete, it's accepting waste. This photograph was from an earlier November, and what we were doing was we had put debris in there and mixed it with the soil, and as we follow our placement plan for putting material in there, periodically we will put just a layer of soil there that goes all the way across, that sort of ties everything together and keeps everything together. And then more debris goes on top of that. It's like when we're baking a cake and we're putting different layers together on it. And so that cell is actually active. All the rainwater and any leachate that's generated from that is collected and is treated prior to going to one of our permitted outfalls. If we look above that, you'll see cell 4, and that liner construction is underway. And I put an insert picture in here that shows you what the liner is. There's stone, and then we have these a secondary liner with a leak detection system, a primary liner with a leachate collection system, and then we put the debris in there. And what we do is, you're seeing this layer in here which has the stone, which is above one of the liner systems, okay? And there's piping inside that stone. And when we put down these liner systems, it's a high density polyethylene, and it's 70 mils thick. And the slide will come back on. I'll just keep talking. But it's 70 mils thick, which is a very, very rigid material. And it's actually welded together and leak checked. And so basically, we take this material, we roll it out, and it's welded together using specialty contractors and equipment. And we leak check it. And Ohio EPA comes down and observes this leak checking and validates all of the data to make sure that it is, in fact, leak proof. And then the stone goes on top of it, and you'll see an area there that is darker. That's because that's wet, and that's part of the way that we do the leak check on it, is we wet it down, and then we pass an electrical current through it. And if there's conductors on the underside of the liner, so that if there is a flow of current, we'll be able to detect it, and it'll tell us that we've put a leak in it when we applied the stone. And then when you look over here and you see further above it, cell 5, that's that actual liner material that's down on there that they're in the process of putting in and welding together. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so how do we get together and plan a job like this? Well, we're engineers, and what we do is we make a plan and then we work a plan. And when we're putting our plan together, we rely on several things. We rely on our knowledge and procedures and things that we're taught on how to do things properly. There's a lot of regulations, safety regulations, OSHA regulations that guide us in doing this. But one of the main sources in most of these regulations and guidelines that we have are based on lessons learned from other projects. And that's why the regulations get updated, is to incorporate lessons learned. And we have the advantage of being a part of a large complex that's doing similar type work in Oak Ridge and other places. And they did take down the former gaseous diffusion plant in Oak Ridge, so it was a great source of lessons learned. And so we take those and we apply them. I actually mentioned a few of them. One of them was the use of fixative. We use fixative, and we use it in higher concentrations than they did when they were out at Hanford doing work. We also put in that berm around the building that collects all of the water from it. That was a lesson learned from Oak Ridge, to make sure that we collect that and treat it. In addition, we did some things that are just common sense. We removed the hazards from the building to make it safer for demolition. We make sure we use a trained, experienced workforce. People that have been here have been at the site for numerous years. They're familiar with the way we do business, the high safety standards that we use. That trained, experienced workforce is a definite asset in everything that we're doing here. And as I say, we have these protective measures that we use. Could I have the next slide, please? But a plan, it's great to make a plan, but you have to check it. We have a saying here: trust but verify. And what I want to talk about here is the way that we are verifying that we're bringing this building down safely and controlling any of the contamination that's in it is through monitoring. And we spoke a lot last week, or not last week, I should say last month, about some of the real-time monitors that we put in. Frank talked a lot about it. He's going to talk tonight about some of the other monitoring systems that we have in place. This shows the area that's a circle there is called the windrows. And what that demonstrates is with a prevailing wind direction, which is very important. And that's from our meteorological tower that we have on site. And we use that to, along with scientific models to determine what we can expect from dust and how things would be dispersed. And we use that to determine where we put monitors in. And if you look at the right-hand side here, you'll see this diagram that has a lot of dots in it. And I want to focus on the area that's around where the buildings are. And you'll see there are a lot of dots. And Frank talked extensively last week about what those were and the monitors that we have. And it basically, we put these in as a layer. Kathy's going to talk a little bit later about the philosophy of this, but we monitor close to the site and mid-range from the site, and then at the perimeter of the site. So we have a multiple layer of monitoring. So if we're going to detect any problem, we're going to detect it close to where we're doing the demolition. And that's the thing we're keeping our eye on with real time. And we want to make sure we catch anything there before it can get a chance to get to the perimeter of the site. Can we have the next slide, please? These things are monitored, I said real time. This is a photograph of a technician that is doing that real-time monitoring. And that's happening all the time while we're doing demolition. And in fact, the technician is also monitoring the data from the meteorological tower to determine wind speed, so that we can make sure that we work within our established limits, so that she can give real-time feedback to the operating and the demolition team. May I have the next slide, please? And all the data that we've gotten since we started demolition has shown that we're doing a good job controlling dust, and we're monitoring for that with particulate matter, and we're finding that we have a good control of that. The water and the fixative applications are effective. We also are monitoring for radiological releases, and we're measuring that with some real-time measurements, and it shows that we're being protective of workers. That the detection limits are minuscule, if anything at all, what we're seeing. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, what we're going to focus on tonight, or I should say what Frank's going to focus on, is the co-located monitoring system. A couple of years ago, when we were getting ready to start this, we got together with the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency and the Ohio Department of Health and proposed to co-locate monitors here so that they could do an independent verification of what we were doing when we were sampling. So that way the public could get data from their trusted representatives within the state. And so we did actually install 23 air monitoring stations to provide this independent confirmation. And Frank's going to talk to you about what some of the data has shown and a little bit more about what some of those monitors are and where they're located. And with that, I'll turn it over to Frank. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. My name is Frank Johnston. I'm the Director of Environmental Protection for Fluor BWXT. Jeff did provide a good intro into what we're going to talk about tonight, because we did spend some time back in October, our first couple public meetings, to talk about that real-time data. Not only what the performance was telling us, which was it's been pretty good so far, but how we were using that real-time data to control our activities, because that gave us the insight into when we might need some additional controls or improve the controls that were there. So we did spend a lot of time talking about that real-time data for particulate matter as well as for some of the radiological constituents. And as Jeff said, tonight we're going to expand our focus a little bit. We're going to look at some of the monitoring systems that we have beyond the project boundaries. And so we'll get into that here in my section of the presentation. So just a little bio, a couple bullets there. I have had 37 years of experience. I'm a chemical engineer by degree, worked in the environmental field all my professional career. Worked 31 years on demolition projects and environmental remediation projects, similar to what's going on here at Portsmouth. And I've been here working at Portsmouth since the beginning of our contract back in March of 2011. Next slide, please. So in our last couple public meetings, we talked about contaminants concerns. We wanted to identify those contaminants that we wanted to make sure that we were controlling. And Jeff made reference to the fact that we went through a significant deactivation effort from 2011 through 2020 for the 326 building, such that we removed a lot of chemical hazards and radiological hazards that were present. But there are some residual contaminants that remain in the building. In addition, some of the contaminants that we're dealing with just have to do with the materials of construction of the building. As was indicated, Jeff indicated that we were cutting up debris, cutting up I-beams, things like that. That can impart some of the contaminants that we're talking about into the air. So the residual contamination, the materials of construction, give us a set of contaminants that we need to be aware of and look at very closely. That's the set of contaminants concern that we're talking about. Those are non-radiological contaminants like metals, asbestos, volatile organic chemicals, polychlorinated biphenyls, which are the PCBs, as well as the radiological contaminants of uranium and technetium and some transuranics that we'll talk about. So another important note about these contaminants of concern, while we focused upon 326 in developing what that set of contaminants were that we would be looking for, it's important to realize that some of these contaminants can find their way into the environmental media that we're dealing with as well. That's important to recognize because the monitoring that we are going to be talking about here in a few minutes kind of looks at the site from a cumulative aspect. These monitors that we'll be talking about are set away from project boundaries. They're kind of looking at the site from a cumulative aspect. So not only the 326 demolition, but the excavations that we're undergoing, the water treatment systems that we're operating, the placement of wastes in the on-site waste disposal facility. So these contaminants we can find in all these locations, and we are. I'm sorry, the screen was going pretty quick there. So we wanted to make sure that we were looking at a comprehensive way at those contaminants at these monitoring stations. Next slide, please. So we did, during the demolition design effort for the 326, we did a comprehensive air modeling effort. And what we looked at, we didn't look at just the sources of our contaminants, like the demolition facility and the demolition project and the on-site waste disposal facility. But we also looked, as I mentioned, at a cumulative impact. The cumulative impact from all these activities, what was going to be the impact on-site as well as at our property boundary and off-site. So we did an extensive air modeling effort to determine what our impacts were. And we came to the conclusion that we could successfully, with the proper controls, do these activities and meet the requirements, regulatory requirements, environmental standards that we needed to meet at the fence line and beyond. This air model was peer reviewed by an independent expert that was brought in by FBP. It was also reviewed by an independent expert, independent of that was brought in by the Department of Energy. We provided this air model to Ohio EPA for their review, and they approved that model on May 20, 2020. So that model demonstrated to us that we could meet the requirements that we had to meet, but we were also using that model to develop the air monitoring program that we are currently implementing. Next slide, please. So these are some of the air monitors. I think one of the slides that Jeff had showed a more comprehensive list or a comprehensive location of all the monitors. What's shown here are the 326 demolition project-specific monitors, and those are identified by the stars. And then we've got shown the Department of Energy and Ohio Department of Health co-located stations. These are 18 stations identified by the black dots that surround are on property as well as off property. And then there are 5 Department of Energy, Ohio EPA co-located stations, and those are reflected. It's a little bit hard to read here. We have a map later in the presentation which shows those a little bit clearer. It shows the 5 locations of those monitoring stations. Next slide, please. So co-located monitoring is exactly that. When I'm saying co-located, the sampling devices are literally right next to each other. So the Department of Energy and the Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio EPA have come together and installed these monitoring stations. Provides a redundancy in the air sampling to help confirm that our air emission impacts from on and off-site activities are consistently measured. It provides the regulators, our public, important stakeholders of an independent mechanism to evaluate all the air emission data that's collected. And it just provides an increased level of transparency with state regulators as well as our neighbors and our stakeholders. Next slide, please. These are examples of the monitoring stations that we're using. On the left-hand side is the Ohio EPA DOE co-located station. There are 5 of those. These are where we monitor for non-radiological parameters. The right-hand side of the screen is an example of an Ohio Department of Health, Department of Energy co-located station. These stations are used for the monitoring of radiological constituents. Now, the Department of Energy stations that we're talking about, and we'll be talking about the data, those stations have been there for years and years. The Ohio Department of Health has just recently co-located their stations next to the Department of Energy stations. I noted here fluoride, and I asterisked that, and just a brief aside, the Department of Energy monitors for fluoride, and we're continuing to do that monitoring, but it's more of a legacy type of thing. It was important to monitor fluorides in that during operation of the gaseous diffusion plant and some of the other operations, we were handling a number of different fluoride compounds. Fluoride monitoring was important. That's becoming less important. We are continuing to monitor fluoride because there are some of those residual types of fluoride compounds on site. That fluoride data is not, we're not going to talk about that tonight, but it is compiled and reported in the annual site environmental report. Slide, please. So we've got quite an extensive collection and validation and reporting process of the analytical data that we're going to be talking about tonight. I don't want to go too far deep into this, but I do want to give some kind of indication of the process it takes to be able to produce data that can be reported and used for determinations of compliance, for determinations of protectiveness, and to provide, on our various websites and reporting mechanisms. So just real briefly, going through these 6 steps here, the first step is really to identify why we're collecting data. What are we going to use it for? What's its intended purpose? Second step is really to determine if we can get that information using the real-time monitoring, or if it's more amenable to collecting samples and sending those samples to a laboratory for analysis. The third step, and we're going to be talking about data that is in fact sampled and sent off to laboratories for analysis. The third step we're seeing here is getting the result from the laboratory that tells us what a concentration of a particular constituent in the sample is. The fourth step is to determine and verify the quality. Quality assurance and quality control throughout this process is important to ensure that we're producing the quality data that we need to produce and that our regulatory agencies and stakeholders expect. Step 5 is a validation step to determine, to make sure that all that QA, QC data is appropriate, that all our laboratory contract requirements have been met, and that data then is usable for the objective that it was originally identified. And after all that has taken place, that's the point at which the data can be published, again, in a variety of reports, and to the numerous websites. One is listed here. At the end of my presentation, there'll be a couple other websites where this data can then be found and reviewed. Slide, please. So this is a map showing, we'll first talk about the Ohio EPA Department of Energy co-located sampling for the non-radiological sampling. And this is a map that shows those 5 locations. And if you start at the very top and then go clockwise, you'll see the station A50, A52, A54, A51, and then A53, left side of the map there. So at these stations, we're monitoring for metals such as cadmium, lead, nickel, arsenic. We're also monitoring for volatile organic compounds, trichloroethylene being the primary one, in that was an industrial solvent that was used throughout the history of this site, the majority of the history of the operational history of this site. And we can find that in some of the excavations for groundwater. One of the compounds that we're looking at very closely, but we do monitor for other volatile organic compounds as well. We also monitor for fibers and asbestos fibers at these 5 locations. Asbestos is one of those contaminants of concern that introduce an issue to worker safety as well as public safety. We look at asbestos fibers and asbestos fibers at these locations as well. All of these compounds and metals and asbestos that we're talking about are sampled on a weekly basis. Next slide, please. So one of the standards, before I talk about the actual data that we've got and have collected, one of the important standards that I wanted to bring to your attention is a standard called the maximum acceptable ground level concentration. And this is a standard that comes out of an Ohio EPA technical guidance. This standard is developed based on a threshold limit value as well as exposure and operational assumptions. Use this as a standard to compare our results to. This standard is applied at the property boundary and is determined to be a safe and protective standard to meet. We are comparing our data, a lot of the data that we collect, to this standard. It's a calculated standard. One of the operational exposure assumptions is that it is a 24/7 type of exposure, and that a lot of the work that we're doing is outdoors, whether we're working it or not. So that MAGLIC is based on a 24/7 operational exposure. Calculations that develop the MAGLIC and the assumptions and operational assumptions that went into that calculation were all presented in that model, that air model that I referenced earlier, and that was approved by Ohio EPA. It mentioned threshold limit values. Those TLVs, the threshold limit values, come from OSHA as well as the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. Slide, please. So these are some results. Let me explain this chart so that we can understand what we're all looking at. The left side column, the analyte column, is the contaminants of concern that we have taken samples for and had results. The next column is the MAGLIC. That's the calculated value that has been determined to be the safe and protective value for each of the analytes. That is in a unit of micrograms per cubic meter. So for instance, the safe and protective limit that we've adopted for antimony is 11.9 micrograms per cubic meter. Then you can see the MAGLIC values for each of the analytes continuing down that column. The next columns are actually the air monitoring stations themselves, A50 through A54. What we've provided here are the maximum detected values that we have recorded between December 2020 and July 2021. And as we look at these numbers, you'll see pretty readily that they are all significantly lower than those the MAGLIC values, those protective values that we're using as a basis of comparison. You will notice that I think there are 3 NAs there. That does not mean not applicable. That means that there was none detected. So for instance, beryllium, we have never detected at A52 or A53. The same for chromium. We've never detected that at station A53. All the other results, again, these are maximum detected levels. And that's what we are seeing and then comparing and showing that it's significantly less than those MAGLIC values. Next slide, please. So asbestos sampling, as I mentioned, we do that weekly as also. This is done a little bit differently. This is basically done in a 2-step process using 2 different analytical methods, both of which are approved by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. The first step in the process is that we take a sample for fibers. If we have a detection of fibers, then we go to another NIOSH-approved analytical method to determine if any of those fibers are asbestos. And to date, there are no indication that we have any asbestos fibers detected at any of the Ohio EPA DOE co-located stations. Slide, please. So now we'll turn our attention briefly to the radiological sampling, air monitoring that we're doing. As I mentioned, we are doing transuranics, americium, neptunium, plutonium isotopes, doing thorium isotopes, we're doing total uranium as well as uranium isotopes, and we are doing technetium-99. Now, the transuranics and the thorium isotopes are sampled quarterly. The uranium and technetium are sampled monthly. But I want to explain that just a little bit further. This is we are getting results quarterly and monthly. The sampling technique that is set up is actually a 24/7. We have the monitoring equipment pulls ambient air through a filter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we change that filter weekly. So every week we go out and change, collect the filter, then we add a new filter and restart the sampling station, and then it runs for 24/7 for a week. And we continue that all month and collect either 4 or 5 samples, 4 or 5 filters, depending upon the number of weeks in a particular month. Those filters are then combined and sent to the laboratory where they undergo the analytical methods for digestion and analysis. Slide, please. So I mentioned transuranics. The ones that are of concern here at Portsmouth are neptunium, plutonium, and americium, and they're shown here at the bottom of the periodic table of the elements, highlighted in red there. Transuranic simply means they're heavier than uranium. We have monitored at the DOE locations for these transuranics for years and years, going back to the mid-90s. There have been occasional detections of transuranics during this sampling that has been conducted over the history that we've been doing that sampling, but they've been very, very sparse and transient, but there have been a few detections. Next slide, please. I had a bulleted bullet on the previous slide, but really this is the chart, and the punchline here is that on data that has been collected from January 2021 through June 2021, we have had no detections of transuranics or thorium isotopes at any of the 18 Ohio Department of Health, Department of Energy co-located locations. Next slide, please. Now this slide looks at total uranium. And I didn't explain it for the other chart, but I will here because we have a couple detections. The x-axis, the horizontal axis, lists each of the air monitoring stations from closest to the 326 demolition facility to the farthest. So the A52 monitoring station is the closest of the Ohio Department of Health, Department of Energy co-located stations. A37 is the furthest away. A37 is actually about 13 miles, I believe 13 miles upwind of Portsmouth. Now these charts are not showing two different sets of data. They're basically showing the same data, but at different scales. The larger chart shows where the protective level for uranium-238 isotope is. Derived concentration standard for that is at 5.3 micrograms per cubic. The analytical results for total uranium and for U-238 are so low that you would not be able to even see them on the scale that we have here. So we inserted kind of a blow-up chart that shows what those detections were. So we had 3 detections of total uranium, one at the A52 location, which is closest to the 326 demolition facility, and then another location, A36, which is on property. And quite frankly, right now, I'm not remembering exactly where that's at, but it is on DOE property. Next slide, please. So in a similar fashion, we're showing some results for technetium-99. And again, the horizontal axis is listing the monitoring stations from closest to furthest away. And we're showing the same data, but at different scales. The larger chart, we're showing the red line. That's the protective level. That's the derived concentration standard for Tech-99. That is the protective level. Again, the detections that we have had, if we put it on this chart, you would not see. We took an opportunity to blow that up again to show what those concentrations are. So we did have four detections of Tech-99, one at each of the stations that are shown there. Blue indicates a pre-demolition result. Pre-demolition meaning before transite began being removed from the 326 facility back in February, and the orange shows a post-demolition detection. Slide, please. So this is my concluding slide here. The results from the DOE co-located air monitors are, the analytical results are consistent with the Ohio EPA and the Ohio Department of Health data that we've been able to compare so far. That data is posted. They're one of the websites that DOE posts their data at is the Pegasus website. That shows the website or shows the DOE data along with the Ohio EPA data as well as the ODH data, so that you'd be able to show and see if there are any significant differences between the analytical results that we've had. But what we're seeing so far is that the data from these stations are consistent. The takeaway here, most importantly, is that the data that we have seen so far has been shown to be very protective. No detections even approaching any kind of regulatory limits or protective standards. So the data that we've seen so far is showing that the controls that we're putting in place and management practices that we are putting in place are being effective. The last bullet there is just showing the location of where this data is being posted. I mentioned the Pegasus website for DOE, Ohio EPA's website, and the Ohio Department of Health's website are there such that you can pull that data up and review it at your. So that's all I have. I appreciate your attention. I am now going to turn this over to Dr. Kathy Higley, who will now talk about the air monitoring and put it in some risk context.
Thank you very much, Frank. Could I have the next slide? Thank you. So as Frank mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the air monitoring and how does that play into managing risk. And just a little bit about me. I'm a professor at Oregon State University. My area of expertise is in radiation protection. I've been at Oregon State nearly 30 years. I've been doing radiation protection related topics for more than 4 decades. I do work in the area of environmental transport and uptake of radionuclides and how those impact people and the rest of the environment. And I've done work in contaminated environments around the world and published research on this. So next slide, please. So what we're going to be talking about today is a little bit regarding risk, and the risk that you're exposed to varies depending on sort of what hat you're wearing. With your employment, or if you're recreating your home life, there can be different levels of risk that you're subject to. And often underpinning this are regulations and standards that are meant to keep you safe, but those levels may be slightly different. Whether you're, say, driving a truck and there are regulations requiring, only a certain number of hours at the wheel, or if you're out recreating and there are requirements for, how many wheels on your ATV, or at home and looking at issues regarding airbags and seat belts in your car. So risk really varies depending on the situation you're in, and we'll chat a little bit about that today. Next slide, please. So you've heard about the air monitoring efforts that are going on at the site, and you saw a picture of the windrows. I believe Frank had that up, or Jeff had that up originally, and talked about how they used information from studying the wind patterns around the site and doing some modeling of where contaminants might go to understand how to place their air sampling stations, both close in and actually further out. And what you see in this particular graphic is just an example from a decommissioning effort at another DOE site. And you get this for activities that are pretty low to the ground. And this demolition action at Portsmouth really is considered a pretty low to the ground effort. You kind of get this bullseye pattern. If you're going to see releases from a facility, the highest concentration of your contaminants are largely going to be close into the site, and then the concentrations get smaller and smaller as you move away from it. And so in ports, for example, they have multiple movable monitors that move with the deactivation or the deconstruction activities and are close in and meant to be protective of the workers. And then you have fixed stations that are further out. These are along the site boundaries, and the focus of those are largely on protecting public and the environment. And because the concentrations are expected to be different at these locations, you may see, and you're protecting workers, say, versus the public, you may have different sampling times, different procedures, different kinds of equipment. And all of that's designed based on what questions you're trying to answer. Next slide, please. So going on to exposure limits, as I mentioned, you have workers and the public, and there are a range of different regulatory limits that are out there for radionuclides, for hazardous chemicals, for volatile organics. And if you look into the regulations, what you can see is oftentimes there are different standards for workers versus the public. And part of the reason for this is that, in general, the workers are assumed to be exposed about 40 hours a week as a course of their job. And they're of a pretty defined age group, 18 to 70 years, generally presumed to be pretty healthy. Whereas the public, they may have continuous exposure, 24 hours a day, no control over the exposure. And the public includes everybody from the very, very young, newborn, in utero, to the very old. And it may have very sensitive or at-risk groups that have, compromised immune systems, for example. So the result is that if you look at the regulations, you may see different standards for workers versus the public. And it's because these sorts of considerations are taken in developing the standards. Next slide. As was mentioned in Frank's talk, there are a number of different constituents that are being sampled, a whole range of metals, and he talked about the frequency of sampling. Also radionuclides, asbestos, volatile organic compounds, and other constituents. And because I started out as a chemist early in my life, I like viewing things in the context of the periodic table of elements. And what you can see on here are where most of the metals are situated. At the bottom of the periodic table, also known as that part of the periodic table that you never learn about in high school or even in college chemistry usually, are the radionuclides of concern. So that includes, thorium, uranium, then the transuranics, the beyond uranium, neptunium, plutonium, and americium. And oh, by the way, up in the middle, of the periodic table is also technetium-99, which is one of the constituents that's being considered. Next slide. So in doing the sampling and the monitoring, in addition to using the windrows to figure out where to place your sampling stations, making predictions of what the concentrations are going to be, you also have to kind of understand what are the possible contributors to the sampling results that you're going to see. So you have the site activities that can contribute to the data that you're collecting, but there may also be natural or human-caused sources outside of the activities, the deactivation, demolition activities, maybe from other activities on site, or in some cases, it's simply because of the underlying geology of the site. Now, a number of these metals, they're distributed all over the place just because of the type of rock and soil that you have around your area. Similarly, human activity, whether it's driving cars or having coal plants or electronics that are being handled, those may contribute to a signature that you need to be aware of when you're analyzing the data that you've collected. Radionuclides are the same thing. Uranium is naturally occurring in addition to having been used at Portsmouth, and so you need to be mindful. Are there natural sources? There are mining activities. Uranium can occur in fertilizers, for example, which might not be well recognized. Technetium, which is definitely produced in the fission process, can be distributed because of fallout, and also just a really tiny amount of it can be created through natural processes as well. So again, when you collect this information, and Frank talked about the process of collecting data, and then you analyze it, and then you have to ensure that what you've done is a quality product. Part of it is looking at sampling stations and also control stations that are meant to be away from the site of the activity that you're doing. Next slide, please. And so when we're looking at radiation and radiation sources, for example, to understand what is taking place at the site, you need to be mindful that radioactive materials, natural sources of them, are all over, and they vary as a consequence of the underlying geology. So if you see this map at North America on the top left corner, that shows how the radiation dose from naturally occurring radioactivity, mainly uranium, thorium, and potassium, vary across the United States. And you can get about a factor of 10 difference in your dose rate simply because of the geology differs across the United States. The bottom view of North America shows the radiation dose that comes to us as a consequence of radiation particles from outer space, from the sun, from the cosmos. And that varies largely as a consequence of elevation, and it's not quite as substantial as the change in dose rate from the natural radioactivity in soils, but it's still, you can see a doubling in the dose rate. And so, for example, if you're in Denver, your dose rate could be twice as high as if you are in Ohio, for example, and that's just because of cosmic radiation. Now, and all of those natural sources, on average, in the United States, give us about 300 millirem a year. Some people will be much higher, some people will be a lot lower. And on top of that, medical doses, on average, in the United States, give us about 300 millirem a year. Again, it may depend, did you have a lot of dental work done, or did you break a couple bones, you had a lot of x-rays, or maybe a CT scan. And so the background, what we consider background, both natural and from medical sources, are around 600 millirem per year to people on average in the United States. Now, in comparison, if you look at the Portsmouth annual site environmental reports, their projection to doses to the public from activities at ports is about a millirem per year contribution. So you can see that the activities at ports are a very, very small fraction of what you routinely get just as a consequence of being alive in the US. Next slide, please. Now I want to take a minute and sort of explain this graphic. So how do we come to set up exposure limits or cleanup limits with regard to radioactive materials and radiation doses? And it's because we've been looking and studying the effects of radiation and radiation exposure for, well, more than 100 years, actually. And so this graphic lays things out in terms of how long the exposure occurs on the bottom axis, from really short seconds up to years. And on the left-hand side, the axis expresses doses in millirad and millim. And the difference is really, really high doses are normally expressed in millirad, and lower doses are in millim. And it's because radiation protection is a very strange field. So if I could have you advance the slide. And so we know in really high doses and really high dose rates, there are severe effects. In really low doses and low dose rates, we don't see any sort of observable effect. So how do we sort of manage this kind of information? So again, in the high dose rates, in the 10 million or millirad, for example, we can see skin burns, death, cancers. In the really low dose regions, though, and that's less than like 10,000 milliram, we have to calculate it using mathematical models. That's where the natural environmental exposures sit. That's also where diagnostic procedures like x-rays sit. But you have therapy, radiation therapy for cancer treatment, for example. That's in a high dose region because you're killing cancer cells. And we understand the risk because we look at data from Japanese atomic bomb survivors, people that were exposed during the Chernobyl accident, to a lesser extent from Fukushima, and then all the information we gain from radiation therapy, diagnostics, and other groups where we develop our models for exposure. So again, the natural environment, we calculate effects using models. And if you look at the really, really low dose region, that's typically where your cleanup goals are for DOE sites. In that region where we don't observe effects, we can calculate impacts, but we don't observe effects in the population. Next slide, please. So again, going back to, how do you achieve this endpoint for managing risk? And you have these underlying requirements that tell you what you have to do to protect your workers, what you have to do to protect the public, and what you have to do to protect the environment. These are the standards for protection that are out there. And as Jeff talked early on in his presentation, this process is pretty arduous and pretty thorough, where you take a very hard look at what you want to do, you analyze it, you plan again, and then you implement it. And with regard to the air monitoring efforts, they pick the monitoring locations for safety and relevance based on what they assume or what they've learned about how wind and air moves across the site. Once they understand this, then they start their process for deactivation, decommissioning, and deconstruction, and ultimately release the site for redevelopment. Next slide, please. So the big takeaway is that the acceptable risk varies, and this depends on are you wearing your hat as a worker, are you recreating, or are you just sort of generally living in the vicinity? And the important thing is the goal of remediation of this site is it's not to eliminate all risk from the site, but to reduce it to a level that meets the requirements for workers, public, and the environment. And safety is integral and always has to be part of the consideration. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I would turn this over to our host.
Hey, thanks, Kathy. Hey, I want to take a second and I want to give a proper appreciation to Jeff Bettinger, to Frank Johnston, and of course, Dr. Kathy Higley. We appreciate their time and the effort they put into sharing this information with us, and hopefully it's been received in an easy manner, right? Hopefully we worked really hard to try to make this as user-friendly as possible. Hey, I also want to point out that if you want copies of tonight's presentation, the link is in the chat boxes on either WebEx or YouTube. You can click it, download the PDF, and you can have access to the slides that our presenters use tonight. Hey, as we start to transition forward, I wanted to remind you a couple other things. You can go to the website portsdemo.com. Portsdemo.com. You can see it on the screen. It's got a website focusing on the X326 project air monitoring data. where you can see updated real-time and co-located monitoring data, project updates. It's got a list of frequently asked questions. So it's another great resource for you to access if you want to keep up with what's going on. So what if, as promised, we take a short break? Let's go. I am looking at 6:10. What if we take a 5-minute break? We'll return at 6:15. At that point, we'll walk through the questions. We received several email questions, and so we'll talk through those, and then we'll open up for public comment. So at 6:15, we'll be back. We'll let our presenters get a sip of water and step away from their computer for just a second, and we'll see you guys shortly. Thanks. All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back. It is 7:15. Sorry, my Central Time clock is throwing me off here. 7:15 Eastern Time. So we have a series of questions that we received from either post meeting on Tuesday and through our meeting tonight, primarily through email. So we want to acknowledge the questions that were written and talk about how we're going to respond to those and go forward from that. So, all right. So we have Jeff and Frank and Kathy with us. So let's see. Let's kind of walk through this and see where we're going. Make sure you guys are unmuted. Oops. I think I muted you back, Jeff. There we go. All right. So question number one was from Dr. Michael Martin. Can you define the ground level in regards to max acceptable ground level concentration? And we're going to provide a written response on the website. So you're going to see lots of questions we received are going to have a written response. Another couple questions from Dr. Martin are going to receive a written response. We did receive a question via the public comment period from Vina Colley, who was with us on Tuesday night. When are we going to have a real public meeting? And the answer is that considering the COVID pandemic, we're assuming a real public meeting means an in-person public meeting where we can all be in the same room. Considering the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, we are limited to the virtual setting. As soon as numbers change and it becomes safe and a viable option to be back in person, then we will forgo that. But as always, health and safety comes first. And so at this point, this model is our best path forward and allows us to continue discussions. All right, so let's see. Questions from tonight. We received several questions from Dr. David Minuta via email. And we're going to give you written responses to those, David. They're going to show up on the website. About the safeguards noted for gamma rays and neutrons, de minimis levels of chemical and radiological toxins. We had a question from Gail Witt, who sent in an email. Who developed the Maglic value tables? How accurate, plus and or minus, and percentage of accuracy? I Googled and found no explanation. So a question on the Maglic tables and how accurate they are. Frank, do you want to kick off an answer on that?
Yeah, I can try to give an answer. As far as I'll start with the Googling. If you would Google Ohio EPA Maglic, there are several things that come up, but I think it's technical standard number 70 will come up, and that's the technical standard that talks about the Maglic and how it's calculated. I believe it even gives some examples. I can't really speak to the accuracy per se. I do know that Ohio EPA uses this method extensively in their permitting process for the purposes of permitting air toxics. So it is based on a TLV, and it is based on or used for air toxics. So I believe Ohio EPA puts a great deal of confidence in the fact that it's a protective measure given some of the air pollutants they have to permit. Okay.
So if you'll Google Ohio EPA Maglic, that should, you said number 70, should start getting there in the right direction.
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Frank.
And if you don't get it, you email me and I can certainly get it back out.
Oh, perfect. Thanks. Gail had another couple questions on that we're going to provide written responses to. We did want to provide a couple answers tonight for, though. Jeff, this one's for you. What tests have been done on water and soil from boundary out 100 miles? I live in Ross County. Are there any tests showing the contamination in my area, past and present, for air, water, and ground?
Okay, thanks, Eric, and thanks for the question, Gail. We do not sample that far out. We do have a very extensive sampling regime that we have in place. It's the annual environmental report that we put together. We call it the ACER. And that is a public document. We can post a link for where you can access that. I think you can get it on Pegasus, and it has extensive sampling of air, water, soil media. In addition, even things like livestock and plants are done in the ports area and within those monitoring. There's some off-site and on-site, but they're close into the actual port site, and it's part of our environmental monitoring program. And we have this data that goes back more than 20 years, and it's all accessible online. But we don't do anything that goes out as far as Ross County.
Okay. Hey, Charles Love, I know you're following along. If possible, can you put a link to the Acer in the chat feature for everyone if it's easy for you to get to? If not, we'll add it later. Hey, Jeff, another follow-up question for you. What are future plans for your 3,700 acres surrounding these buildings in Portsmouth demo area?
Okay. Well, the future plans for the Department of Energy, the Environmental Management Organization, is to clean them up. Okay. And then the future plans as far as industrialization, and then turn them over to the local community. And we do that through the Southern Ohio Diversification Initiative. What happens with it after that is up to the local community, and they need to take the initiative to make something happen there. We, as the department and the Environmental Management Organization, we can only use the funding that we get to clean up the site. And so there's a lot of different opportunities for redevelopment. And what I want to refer you to is a great website that Ohio University has put together called portsfuture.com. Okay, Charles is going to post that. It's portsfuture.com, and it's done through a grant that we have with Ohio University, and Stephanie and her group out there have done a great job with talking to other organizations, working with the Southern Ohio Diversification Initiative to find potential uses for the site. And I know they've done extensive amount of work to look at things that would be amenable to the site and also to the skill set and natural resources that are available here. So once again, I refer you to portsfuture.com.
Hey, perfect. That's outstanding. And Charles already has those links for the Acers as well as to the portsfuture.com and the WebEx, and they're being added to the YouTube chat as well, which makes it easy for anyone who's following along to access those. Thanks, Jeff. Hey, Gail has another question. How many people have been mailed your notifications, and how far from the Piketon boundary? Gail, you'll be glad to know that 87,000 notifications were mailed out to residencies in the 4-county area. 87,000. In addition, there were stakeholders that have signed up for DOE mailing lists that were notified. And if you're following along and you're participating tonight and you're not on a DOE mailing list and you would like to be added, you can sign up for the mailing list at the portsvirtualevent.com website, which would have launched you into either the WebEx or the YouTube. So portsvirtualevent.com, there's an access point where you can look at Charles added it. You can take off from there and sign up to be on the DOE mailing list to make sure that you get included in future notifications if you're outside the 4-county area. All right, then Gail had a follow-up question on the potential area affected by contaminants, and that's going to be a written response. So everything I think has been addressed. A couple of the questions are a little more nuanced and they're going to take a little longer to answer. Look for those answers to go up in the next couple of weeks. You can access that website again through the portsvirtualevent.com. You can click on there's a question and answer tab at the bottom. I think the one links to the October meeting. I'm going to assume they'll put a link to the November meeting, but don't hold me to that. But I'm guessing there's going to be some clear and easy way where you can access these future questions as they pop in. And if you have additional questions that our discussion tonight leads you into, please don't hesitate to email us. Donnie, do you have the slide with the web link for the email address? It's ports-demo-questions at pppo.gov. Ports-demo-questions at pppo.gov. And I know several of you have asked that question. Okay. We had a couple other questions that popped up in the chat that we're going to respond to in writing that aren't, they're a little more nuanced and take a little bit. So I didn't want folks to think we ignored their questions. All questions have been captured. but we are, just some are easy to answer quickly in person, and some take a little time, and we'll make sure we get you a complete and thorough answer, and then those will be in writing on the website. All right, so we're going to take a second, and we're going to transition into public comment. All right, so this is kind of a new thing for us, doing this virtual model public comment, and it worked pretty well. So the easiest way to be engaged in the public comment, one, you have to be on the WebEx feed. We just don't have the capability to take input for public comment on the YouTube page. So if you're on the WebEx feed, you can see that there is a little smiley face and a kind of an emoticon button at the bottom, and you can click on that, and it'll give you options of reactions to choose from, including the raise your hand. And if you just click on the little hand, we'll get a little icon grow up. I can see Haley and Dr. Menuda have already raised their hand. If anyone else would like to participate in public comment, we're going to ask you to go ahead and raise your hand now, and we'll identify you. I'll call on you and unmute you, and allow you a chance. We'll have 3 to 4 minutes. We're going to ask you to keep your comments focus on tonight's discussion, if at all possible. Any questions you ask during the public comment, we're going to take as written questions. Charles and some of the folks behind the scenes are going to capture the question and make sure we get an answer for you. But we're not gonna provide answers to the oral questions right now. It's just a comment section. So with that, I'm going to call on Haley. I'm going to send you a note so you can unlock Haley, just like we practiced earlier. Are you there, ma'am?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh, you sound great. So you want to introduce yourself for us?
I'm Haley. I'm a community advocate for Highland County, going through all the health concerns and the high rates of cancer. And I'm actually really disappointed you guys didn't answer my question there, considering it's a yes or no, because I want to know. Would you live there? Would you let your kids grow up 5 to 10 miles from the plant? Would you let them swim in the water, breathe in the air, playing in the dirt? Would that be comfortable with you? What's your fear 10 years from now when your children grow and develop and they end up with cancer from all these exposures? You're comfortable with that? Anyway, I recorded my message so I didn't lose my voice or train of thought, and I'm going to play that for you guys now.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
Would you let your families live in this region? Would you live 5 miles from the plant? How about 15? Would you be comfortable with your children or family breathing in the air, drinking the water, playing in the dirt, exploring the creek bed? The cancer rates and rare diseases in this region are extremely high, with many of these cancers being labeled rare. It's hard to trust in the agencies overseeing these issues because there have been notable lies for years from the DOE, DOJ, and ODH. 6 years ago, when I started digging into these issues because our community's children were experiencing high rates of cancer, ODH told me this region's cancer rates are growing, and we need to just accept that. Our rates are going to be higher than other places. This is our new normal, and we need to be okay with that. I am not okay with that. We shouldn't have to accept that our children are getting cancer at high alarming rates. The science and proof behind the extent of contamination from this plant are there. This is widespread. It's not just affecting Pike County. It's affecting at least 5 other counties surrounding it. It's affecting our air, water, and soil, the food that's grown in the region, the animals that people are hunting and then eating, the cracked aquifers that the plant is sitting on. Those contaminants are leaching into that. They're running off. They're running through our rivers. They're running through our creeks, which is then therefore contaminating more widespread of an area. Also, stop shouting that some of these levels are within legal limits, because that in itself is an issue. Most, if not all, of those limits were set over 20 years ago. An outdated system that doesn't take into account today's science and what we know now about exposure and health. No new chemicals have been added. It's basically a joke in today's world. I am glad more air monitors are being put in place. That's some sort of step in a direction. But we need to hear these organizations that have been monitoring this plant the past 20 years or so to admit things were bad and unregulated for a long time. And that has negatively impacted our environment and the health of the surrounding communities. And once these toxic chemicals are in your environment, they don't go away. They're known as forever chemicals. We need to prevent more from leaching out, to causing the problem to become bigger. And we need to give help to those that have been affected by the past negligence of these organizations. We need you to own up to your past mistakes and to listen to the voices saying to you, we deserve recognition, we deserve better. We deserve extreme monitoring in all aspects of this. Those that lied and withheld truth about these contaminations and let it get to this level of awful, those people need to be held accountable.
That's it.
Hey, thank you, Haley, and I appreciate your forethought in recording your message to make sure you got all of your comments in. That was very clever of you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Have a great night.
You too.
All right. Next up, and I see Miss Minacali has added her name to the list. We're going to start with, we're going to go to David Menuda. All right. Dr. Menuda, I've sent you are you there, sir?
Yes, sir.
Oh, perfect. Last time we had audio trouble, so it's good to hear from you.
Well, I'm in the office with multiple computers, and this one has voice and video.
Perfect. All right. So you have 3 to 4 minutes, sir.
Okay, if Haley is still here, the cavalry is available to you. So you just have to let me know. Okay, I hope she can hear that. Yeah, Eric, are you there?
She said she can hear. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. All right, on that list that I had sent earlier today, I realized that there'll be more extended answers. But at the Portsmouth site, in the first question that I asked, there are 4 types of ionized radiation. And I didn't see anything in any of DOE studies on the impact of gamma radiation and the impact on neutrons. And I realized the lay citizen at this point thinks I'm speaking Chinese. But the fact is, this is a significant issue that can't be blown off. Okay, the second issue is related to that, where allegedly 326 had been significantly cleaned prior to 2020. And it would be good for people like me to see the reports so that I would be able to weigh in after the fact. I brought up in the third part, especially about arsenic. Arsenic is not radioactive, but it's a deadly toxin as far as skin cancer is concerned and as far as neuropathy is concerned. And so the fact is, there was arsenic contamination in the feed material, and ultimately it was transported through the cascade. And as I've indicated, it concentrated where the Freon did and where the technetium did. So we can't ignore the existence of arsenic and arsenic pentafluoride. Number 4 deals with experts. What DOE may define as an expert and what I define as an expert are 2 entirely different things. So I want to be the judge on who DOE is claiming as an expert. Now, on number 5, I see that it was corrected in the presentation, where in the presentation on the website, we have concentrations in attograms per cubic meter. And I think you see my comment that if that's the case, then those results are meaningless. And if you're going to draw conclusions, you're wasting the public's time. So we need to be certain that those concentrations are in micrograms per cubic meter. So those are parts per minute, where the concentrations, attograms per cubic meter, would be so trivially low that they don't mean anything. Okay, my 6th comment dealt with the plutonium. Plutonium-241 was ignored. Plutonium-241 had to be in the mix of feed materials in order for americium-241 to be formed and for neptunium-237. And so it's disingenuous for DOE to say, by magic, the americium 241 and the neptunium 231 appear. Okay, now the issue with technetium is almost assuredly the technetium is present as a fission product included in the feed material. So again, it's magical thinking to think that it's in fallout, because if it was truly in fallout, then it would be independent of the feed material, and then the readings for TC should be the same throughout the country, not just concentrating near the site. And then my eighth comment dealt with.
Hey, David, I'm gonna need you to kind of wrap up, okay?
Yeah, I know. My last comment deals with the radiation exposure from cancer treatment. The difference between that and dose in the work environment is in cancer treatment, the clinic hires medical physicists and radiation physicists to precisely dose out the radiation. That's not the case in the nuclear industry. So we have uncontrolled doses. And again, it's disingenuous for DOE to say the exposures were low, where we don't have anyone operating in a capacity like a medical or radiation physicist to be able to precisely calculate dose. So that'll wrap up my comments.
Hey, thanks, sir. Hey, it's good to hear from you. Haven't seen you in forever. It's good to catch up with you. Your voice doesn't sound as strong as normal.
We'll be
Yeah.
back to live.
Yeah, I hope you're taking care of yourself, sir. Thanks for your comments. All right. The last person we have that had indicated that she would like to speak is Miss Vina Colley. Miss Vina, I sent you a request to unmute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm okay.
You're nice and loud this evening.
Oh, maybe I should turn it back down.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. I was just wondering, when you only have 2 or 3 speakers, shouldn't you let them go ahead and talk a little bit longer than this 3 minutes that you put on somebody and rush them? And it's a good thing the lady from, where was she from? Highlander? Or?
Yes, ma'am.
It's a good thing she recorded all that. I never thought about doing that, but maybe that's what I need to do. But anyway, I'm really concerned about the exposures to the community, the on-site contamination, the cancer that we have, the school that was shut down. And I have company records myself, knowing that there's transuranic plutonium and americia and all this off-site, and they're very high numbers. And I know over by the X705, those wells over there all had plutonium in it. So we know plutonium's leaving this site. We had a report that radium-226 was leaving the site. We know that cylinder dropped in 78, dropped and left the site by the air and the water. And we need to do more water samples. And if anyone's interested in looking at documents, my number is 740-357-8916. We represent Portsmouth Piketon residents for environmental safety and security. And we're concerned that the bedrock is fractured and all of this stuff is going into our drinking water. There's an awful lot of cancers, and we're very, very concerned about all this. And we actually need to have another public meeting. Of course, I know they're having a lot of problems with COVID on the plant side with the employers, but everybody else has lifted their meetings, and they're starting to have meetings, and they can have parades, and we can have sales place to go to buy stuff and car shows. So I don't know why we can't have a public meeting.
Hey, I appreciate your comments, and thank you for being with us tonight, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Hey, thank you. All right. Okay. Well, that concludes our meeting for the night. We appreciate those of you that followed along on either YouTube or WebEx. We appreciate those that are going to check out the YouTube feed over the next few days. And we know following the meetings last month that several hundred folks tend to jump on and check this out. And we're thankful for the technology that allows those that couldn't be with us either Tuesday or Thursday that allows them to experience this. Again, thanks to Jeff and to Frank and to Kathy for getting us through and sharing their information with us. We appreciate all the folks that are working on the backside to make this work. Jack and Charles and Donnie and so many others that are working to keep this technology running. It takes a lot on the back end to make this available. Hey, don't forget you can send any questions that come up or anything that you didn't feel we answered tonight to ports-demo-questions at pppo3ps.gov. Make sure you check that out. Folks, if we don't talk to you between now and then, have a great holiday season. Enjoy the rest of your December. I don't know where things are where you are, but where I am, numbers are starting to creep up again a little bit, like the COVID numbers. So make wise choices, be safe, mask up, get vaccinated, and hopefully we can get back together soon, maybe after the first of the year in person. That would be so great. So thank you for your time. Thanks for being here. Check out for when we're going to do our next set of presentations. It'll be after the first of the year, and we'll do another round of this, and we can go from there. So with that, I say thank you and good night, and you guys have a lovely evening.